So 2 weeks ago, we began a new series called Unshakable. And if you've missed either of the last two messages, I'd encourage you to go online and listen to those. First week, we talked about what is faith. It's more than just wishful thinking. Faith is active. It's a hopeful trust in God that leads us to actually taking steps forward. And we talked about an equation that might help understand what faith is. Faith is hope times action. So if I want to have faith, or if a person says they have faith that airplanes are safe for travel, that means you have an expectant anticipation that that plane is going to get you where you're going to go. And you have to actually act on that hope by getting on the airplane. That's faith. Now, you may not understand what keeps an airplane up, and you might actually have some concerns that it's going to stay up as long as it's supposed to. But faith says, I don't honestly know how it all works, but I hope it does, and I'm going to actually get on that airplane. Last week, Pastor Stephanie, she talked about worship as the foundation for a life of faith. Unshakable people honor God with their first and with their best. And as we give to Him, we learn to trust God as our provider. And that way, as we learn to live by faith, when the storms of life do come, we are going to be unshakable because our trust is in Him. Now, I think everybody wants security. Everybody wants to be unshakable. But having security and being unshakable, it's not something that's found in our own abilities. It's not in having enough money. It's not in having really good insurance. They're all good things, but none of those make you unshakable. Faith in God is what makes a person unshakable. And so today we're going to look at a part of the story of Abraham. In Galatians, Abraham is called the father of faith. And if you want to become unshakable, Abraham is a good person to look at. And so the title of the message today is Trusting God When the Map is Blank. And before we jump into the story of Abraham, I want to just kind of set the stage of what God was doing on the earth at the time that He lived. So we're going to just do a quick history lesson. You know, God, when he first created the earth, or when He first created people on the earth, He told them, fill the earth and subdue it. God's intention was for people to rule His kingdom on the earth. And He gave authority to Adam and Eve to do that. And God's kingdom, it began as a garden. It didn't fill the entire earth at that time, but His intention was for people to cause His kingdom to fill the earth. So Adam and Eve, of course, we know they disobeyed. And when they chose to obey the serpent, without knowing what they were doing, they gave their authority to the one that they obeyed. They actually gave Satan and his fallen angels authority. They unknowingly chose to step outside of God's kingdom into Satan's kingdom. And so Adam and Eve and all of their descendants became subject to him. In their disobedience, Adam and Eve actually empowered Satan to do the things he wanted to do on the earth. So as a result of that, as odd as this sounds, fallen angels intermarried with people to prevent humans from ever again regaining authority on earth. By the time of Noah, the earth was filling with Nephilim, the descendants of the fallen angels and people. So God, He sent a flood. He rescued Noah and his family. He gave people the chance to start again on earth. Now, God commanded Noah and his family, after the flood, He commanded them to fill the earth. Now, this is a little bit different than what He had commanded Adam and Eve. He did not command Noah to subdue or rule the earth, because Noah couldn't do that. He did not have the authority. So God would have to do something to actually restore authority to human beings. Although God had given humanity a fresh start on the earth, it was only a few generations after Noah that the people on earth united in rebellion against God. And so I'm just going to read a little bit from Genesis 11, just at the beginning of the chapter. At one time, all of the people of the world, they spoke the same language. They found a plain in the land of Babylon, and they settled there. And then they said, "Come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. So all of the people, they join together, they build this tower. And you have to understand, this is not simply an ambitious building project. Ziggurats were built to be stairways from the heavens for the gods to descend to the earth. So what the people were doing is they were uniting in pride, and they were openly opposing God. They said this: this will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world. Now, continuing in verse 5, but the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower that the people were building. Look, he said, the people are united. They all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Of course, unity is very important. Unfortunately, in this case, the people were actually united against God. So he stepped in, confused them with new languages. And then the Bible tells us he actually divided people into different nations at that point. Reading from Deuteronomy 32:8. The Most High assigned lands to the nations when he divided up the human race. He established the boundaries of the peoples according to the number in his heavenly court. So God, he separated people by language into nations, and he put them under the authority of his heavenly court. And you might wonder, what on earth does that mean? Different translations will say this in different words. Basically, what is being communicated is God delegated the authority over humanity to angels, is what he did. And so it was actually after this incident that God called Abraham to follow him. From Abraham, God would establish a new nation that would worship him. And through those people, God would bless all of the nations on earth. What does that mean? The Messiah, the one who would restore authority to people, would actually come from Abraham's family. So just a few, I think these are interesting historical facts. Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. Pastor Stephanie talked about that story a few weeks ago. Noah then lived to be 950. He was really old. Now, scholars estimate, and this is an estimate, it could be a few years off, but the Babel incident occurred about 150 years after the flood. So if that's correct, then Noah was about 750 years old when the Tower of Babel incident happened. He would have been probably one of the few people who did not join in rebellion against God. Now, Abraham was born 292 years after the flood, when Noah was 892 years old. Everyone on earth was one of Noah's grandkids. Abraham was 10 generations after Noah. Abraham was 58 years old when Noah died. There is a possibility Abraham may have known Noah personally. We don't know, but they lived at the same time. So Abraham lived 300 years after the flood. He was alive when people lived in nations that worshiped fallen angels. He would have known all about the Nephilim, the flood, the Tower of Babel. And during Abraham's lifetime, there was not one nation on earth that worshiped God. So kind of with all of this in mind, I'd like to start looking at Abraham's story, beginning in Genesis 11:31. So just as a note, Abraham, he started out, his name was Abram. I'm just going to refer to him as Abraham because it's easier, but you'll see in this verse, it calls him Abram. So Genesis 11:31, Terah took his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, and his grandson Lot, and moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans. He was headed for the land of Canaan, but they stopped at Haran and settled there. That picture of the ziggurat that was up, that's in Ur. It's located in Iraq. I think it's about 80 miles south of Baghdad, I think. This may or may not have been built upon the Tower of Babel, but that was probably there. It's been rebuilt a few times, but that is where Abraham came from. Okay, so before God ever spoke to Abraham, apparently he was already on his way to Canaan with his father Terah and his nephew Lot. And it was while Abraham was settled in Haran that God spoke to him. Now the Lord had said to Abraham, this is in Genesis 12:1, leave your native country your relatives and your father's family and go to the land that I will show you. So God, he's telling Abraham, leave everything you know. And after you leave, then I'm going to show you where you're going. So in a sense, it's like God handed Abraham a blank map. It's like he gave him a blank map. You don't know where you're going. So let's look at how Abraham responded to God, and I think we can discover two principles about trusting God when we don't have all the details, when the map is blank. Now, God may not call you to the ends of the earth, but he is definitely going to call you to step out in ways where you don't have all the details. That could look like a new career or maybe a new area of ministry. It could be a new life situation like getting married or having kids, or maybe it's a new endeavor like writing the book. Anything God calls you into is going to require faith. Because if you remember, you cannot live a life that is pleasing to God without faith. So God calls you into things that require you to trust him. It's a journey of faith with God. Now, what often happens is people start out on a faith journey with God and they run into the first roadblock and then they want to quit because they think that because God has called them, somehow they should already be fully equipped and able to do everything on their own. And that's actually not it at all, because God, he's calling you on a journey with him and he will equip you and teach you as you go. So if we think about Abraham's situation a little bit, he had a pretty comfortable life in Haran. He lived with his father's family. He had stability there with that family. He knew the language. He knew the culture. He had an inheritance coming to him. And then God called him to leave all of that and go into uncharted territory. So he had to leave his family, his friends, his nation, his inheritance. And that may sound like, well, that's just the perfect recipe for being shaken. Leave it all behind and go somewhere where you don't know where you're going. Now, I find it interesting that Abraham was on his way to Canaan with his father, Terah, and they stopped in Haran. And we don't really know why they stopped. Terah was an old man, but he lived another 60 years after God called Abraham. So it could be maybe Terah decided to worship other gods, or maybe he just got comfortable living in Haran and didn't want to keep going. We don't know. So God told Abraham, leave everything you know and go into the unknown. And so you might want to ask yourself, wow, does heading into the unknown, does that shake me? Can I do that? That could look like any number of things. Sometimes God calls us into the unknown. Sometimes we just find ourselves in the unknown due to things that happen in life. You know, it could be a new life situation like a new career, or maybe a medical diagnosis for yourself or someone you love. Or it could be maybe something even further removed from you that has an effect, like COVID, for example, or maybe a change in the government, or maybe a war. So the first principle I want to talk about from Abraham's life is faith begins where comfort ends. So Abraham, he stepped into faith when he was willing to leave comfort behind and trust God to lead him into something new. So Pastor Stephanie, she talked last week about being unshakable in our worship. And so if you think about that, when we give God our first, for example, our finances, when we give God our best, we are taking a step into faith. We become unshakable in that area as we do that, because that fear of losing our finances goes away when we start giving our best to God. You know, when we recognize him as our provider, when we give the things that we may be tempted to hang on to, those things then lose power over us. So when we look at Abraham, he put his hope in God and he acted on that. He was obedient and he left everything behind. And so again, faith begins where our comfort ends. Jesus said it like this: if you want to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. God does not call you into a life that is free of danger, and he doesn't call you to live a comfortable life either. If you cling to comfort, you are shakeable. However, when you leave the things that God calls you to leave, then those things no longer have influence to shake you. So as I say that, like, don't sell everything you own and move to Mongolia, unless God tells you to do that. Faith is obedience to God. It's not doing hard things just for the sake of doing hard things. Now, when we moved overseas, when God called us to the Middle East, we left our comfort and security, and we trusted that God would take care of us. So when we first moved into Egypt, we moved into Nasser City, which we got an apartment in Nasser City, which is a neighborhood in Cairo of about 4 million people. And we didn't live in a gated expat community. We lived in a regular Egyptian neighborhood. While we were moving in, we lived on the 8th floor. We were in a 13-story building. We had plainclothes police come to our door and question us. Now, my Arabic is not great. It's not even good. But I was able to do the best I could to answer their questions. They wanted to know, why are you here? And what are you doing? And I tried to answer their questions, and then they left, and I honestly had no idea what was going on. It was just bizarre. Shortly after that, we're coming home to our building, and there is a row of riot police right in front of our door. So they're all dressed in black. They have helmets, they have shields, they have AK-47s, and we just kind of had to walk between them to get inside. Thought that is really different. When we lived in Jordan, the army, they carried guns, but none of them were loaded. There were no clips in it. These guys are all loaded. They're ready to go. Thought, okay, this is strange. Before we left the U.S. to go to the Middle East, we had people tell us, a number of people said this, don't go there, they'll kill you. Like, that was the encouragement we got from a number of different people. Not very helpful. So you could look at the things that we were experiencing and seeing happening all around us and think, something bad might be coming your way. I forgot to mention, there were bombings going around in the city while we were there. After all these things are happening, we don't really understand what's going on. We found out we had a high-ranking military official living in our building. So we found out the reason the police came was they wanted to make sure we weren't a threat. And then later we found out the reason we had riot police outside was because every time there was a bombing in the city, they were actually there to protect our building because there was somebody important living inside. God is really good. We left our security behind, and he made sure that we were watched over, we were protected, though it didn't necessarily look at it at the time. I can honestly say that I am probably a bit more unshakable now than I was when I left to go overseas. I am not anyone special. Please don't hear that. I can say that I am more unshakable now because I have seen God take care of us in ways that I would not have experienced had I chosen to stay where I was comfortable and secure. It's because I was willing to step out of that I am more unshakable than I was. So one way to become unshakable is to obey God when he calls you out of your comfort zone. Faith begins where comfort ends. You don't have to go to the Middle East to experience this. Leaving your comfort zone might look like being willing to pray out loud. It might be willing to come up front and share a testimony, speaking in front of others. It might look like being willing to pray for someone for healing. There's any number of ways God may call you to step outside of your comfort zone. And so again, our first principle, faith begins where comfort ends. Are you with me so far? Making sense? Okay, our second principle, obedience often comes before understanding. Okay, so another way we could say this is God is looking for us to follow him even when the map is blank, when we don't know what we're doing. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9 says this, My thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, says the Lord, and my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. So basically, God's saying, hey, I'm not like you. You think small. Your thinking is limited by what you think you can do. And the way that I do things is so far beyond anything you could even imagine. What does that mean for me? If my plan for my life looks attainable, it's not God's plan for my life. Because his plan is always going to require me to trust him, because the things that he wants to do for me look impossible. It makes me say, oh my goodness, I could never do that. Which is true. I can't do that, because following God and walking with him requires faith. See, following God in faithful obedience opens doors that your understanding and your knowledge never will. Abraham could not see or understand God's promise for him while he was living in Haran. He needed to trust God rather than trust his own understanding. I mean, how doable would God's promise have sounded to Abraham sitting in Haran? Leave your country and your family. Leave it all behind. So Abraham could have been thinking, wow, that sounds really hard. I'm not a young man anymore. God says, go to the land that I will show you. So what's Abraham thinking? I don't even know where that is. I love this. God says, I will make you into a great nation. So think about this from Abraham's perspective. How? I don't have any kids. My wife is barren. She can't have kids. I'm leaving my family. Normally, a nation starts with a family. How is this going to happen when I'm actually leaving everyone to go and be a foreigner in somebody else's country? That doesn't make any sense. This is kind of cool. God says, I will bless you and make you famous. That's really interesting. God was offering to make Abraham famous. That's what all of the people were trying to do when they constructed the tower. They wanted to make themselves famous. They were united and built a huge tower. Abraham couldn't do anything like that. He wasn't actually united with anyone. He was leaving everyone behind. God said, all of the families on earth will be blessed through you. So he might be wondering, well, how is that going to happen? I'm actually at odds with everybody because nobody wants to follow you. Like, what does that even mean? What does that even look like? Increasing your knowledge or your understanding is not a key to faith. As hard as that might sound, obedience is. People often say, well, I know this, I know that already. I've already heard that. It really doesn't matter. 1 Corinthians 8:2-3 says this, anyone who claims to know all the answers doesn't really know very much, but the person who loves God is the one whom God recognizes. So Jesus said, if you love me, you will obey my commands. Basically, if we're in love with Jesus, we'll obey him. It'll become easy because we love him. It's not, you better obey my commands or you don't love me. It's like if we're in relationship with him, we'll begin obeying. So you could read this verse like this. Anyone who claims to know all the answers doesn't really know very much, but the person who obeys God is the one whom God recognizes. So for us, that means growing in knowledge should not be our focus. What we want to do is we want to grow in obedience. And as we grow in obedience, God will reveal more to us. It's about experience. It's not about knowing it up here. Hebrews 11:8, it was by faith that Abraham obeyed God, let me try this again. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. So again, Abraham was obedient when he had no idea where he was going. So we've talked about this formula. Faith, it's hope times action, or we could say it's hope times obedience. Faith is not and never will be hope times knowledge. Abraham, he put his hope in God and he obeyed God. And so something we just want to notice here, Abraham was not believing God for something contrary that God told him to do. You know, Abraham was not declaring he had faith for a really good job in Haran and a happy retirement community. That was not God's plan for Abraham. God's plan was way bigger. And so Abraham submitted himself to what God was telling him to do. He had no idea how it was going to work out, but he chose to put his hope in God, and he took obedient action. Now, as we grow in faith, it does not mean that one day it's all going to make sense. Some things will make sense, but we can't actually stop there, because this lifetime is going to be a journey of faith. There's actually no ultimate destination where you will no longer need faith, because we're on a journey to actually know God and trust Him. And so as we take steps in that, we're going to continue finding there's more to learn about God because He's infinite. So you will always have more of God to discover and experience, and the only way you will experience Him is by faith, not by knowledge and not by understanding. So none of us, we're ever going to arrive at a place where we do not need faith. So saying that, we can't give up. And Abraham, he didn't give up. He continued to pursue God even when he didn't know how things were going to work. Okay, so how do I apply this? Well, for one thing, I can't wait until I have the whole picture or understand everything before I obey. Because again, God, He rarely gives you a map. He just gives you the first step, and He asks you, to follow Him. So Hebrews 8. I think I can talk. Hebrews 11, 8 through 10. I should drink some water. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and to go to another land that God would give him as an inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going, and even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents. So did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. So clearly we see in Abraham's life, he didn't see everything that God promised him. Abraham looked for a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. That is not the city of Jerusalem. It's not any physical city or nation. It's God's kingdom. Abraham was looking forward to the coming of Jesus, who would establish God's kingdom on earth. Needing to know it all, to have it all figured out, and to be in control is a surefire way to be very shakable. Any control that you have or that you feel you have is an illusion. You could lose complete control of everything in your life in a moment. Would that shake you? It would probably shake me. However, as we learn to give up that control to God, to follow Him, we are in a much safer place. And that doesn't happen in every area of life at once. It's normally, God calls us in this piece to step out and put our faith in Him. And as we do that, He's going to keep calling us. There's always going to be more. We can keep building. So faith is hoping in God and then putting action to that. Even when you can't see the end, we have to learn to allow Him to lead us and trust the results to Him. So 2 ways we can become unshakable. First, faith begins where comfort ends. We have to be willing to leave comfort behind. And we have to be obedient even when we don't understand, even when it doesn't make sense. Are you still with me? Some people are. Okay. Well, we're going to keep going. Okay, I'd like to look at 3 enemies of unshakable faith. If you're wanting to follow God, if you're willing to not have a map and follow Him, you're going to experience some opposition, a little resistance. You have an enemy who really does not want you to become unshakable. He has absolutely no desire for you to live in faith. Think about Peter for a moment. What did he have to do? He had to actually step out of the boat before he could walk on the water. So Satan and all of his demons, they are going to do whatever they can to keep you in the boat. So we're just going to look at 3 common ways the enemy tries us to keep us from becoming unshakable. The first is the fear of the unknown. What if? If we think about what are some of the questions that might have stopped Abraham, what could he have said? What if I don't know the way? What if I get lost? What if the people of Canaan chase me out? What if I never have any kids? We become unshakable when we choose to let go of our need to know all the answers. Faith hopes that God has the answers and then acts on that hope. Number 2, need for control. I have to know everything so I can make all the decisions. We become unshakable when we choose to allow God to lead us. So Jesus, he only did what he saw his Father doing. In God, he's building his kingdom. He's not building my kingdom. Faith steps out to follow God even when we don't know how it's going to work. He's not going to give you a map and send you off alone because he wants to go with you. He wants to be your guide. And the third is attachment to comfort. We become unshakable when we choose to leave the things God calls us out of. This is going to sound really harsh, but comfort is not God's goal for anyone's life. Comfort can actually be a weapon of the enemy. The enemy is not out to make you miserable. He's actually out to make you comfortable. Do you believe that? The enemy doesn't want you to be miserable. He wants you to be comfortable. When you're comfortable, you don't need God. I think that's why God often calls us out of our comfort zone, calls us where we need him. Okay, so real quick, we're going to look at 4 ways to walk in obedience when we don't have all the details. The first is to anchor yourself to God's circumstances, not your character. So we want to trust who he is, not what we see going on around us. Abraham could have asked what if a whole bunch of times, but rather he said, God said this, and that's what he did. Number 2, take the next step. So we want to focus on today's obedience. We don't want to focus on tomorrow's outcome. I think everybody knows the answer to this. How do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time, right. Be willing to take that first step without worrying how you're going to eat the whole elephant. God will enable you to grow as you go with him. You can't do it all at once, so just take that first step. Number 3, surround yourself with people of faith. Abraham took with him his wife Sarah. He took his nephew Lot. The enemy loves to divide and conquer, so don't isolate yourself. Don't be alone. Don't surround yourself with people who have no faith. Don't surround yourself with the people who are going to drag you down. You might need to leave some people behind. Number 4, remember past faithfulness. God, he's guided you before, and he's going to continue to guide you in the future. So remember those things that he has done in your life, and remember the testimonies of what he's done for other people. All right, as we wrap up, that's been a lot. Faith is hope times action, or hope times obedience. Knowledge and understanding don't have any part of this equation, really. Becoming unshakable means being willing to step out when the map is blank, and being willing to step out of your comfort zone when you don't have all of the answers. We're going to close in prayer in a minute. I'd like to ask you to